It may not be a long session today. And I've got COVID. It's the first time I've had COVID since we started on this journey. And I must say that it's been quite horrible and still is. And I want to talk a little bit about my COVID. It's also messing up life. So I shall be very grateful for any advice from anybody on how to avoid getting long COVID, which I so much want to avoid. Hello, Nigel. Nice to see you. Hello, Gawaha. Very good to see you all. There we are. There's Joe. Are you in Nairobi, Joe?
Yes, we are. And I've got a blurry background, so everyone's face is appearing blurry.
Oh,
but we're all well. So.
I think we just saw Zara slip in. That was nice. Nice to see Bernice here. Hello, Zara.
Hi.
Very good. All right. I think Florence is on. Very good. Florence has also got COVID. We found we had it one day apart from each other. That we picked it up, or I picked it up somewhere in eastern Switzerland, and the other people who got it at the same place, they're all a bit unwell actually. Yep. Right. Hello, Jonathan. Nice to see you. Hello, Ad. Back from Vietnam, or are you still in Vietnam? Hello to Tip O'Neill.
I'm still there.
All right. Tip, I've just been having a detailed discussion on access to fertilizers, and I expect you've just been at the International Fertilizer Association annual conference. Perhaps you have.
Yeah, well, I was there, David.
Yeah.
And thank you for your efforts on behalf of food security.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk a bit about that. We've just been with Alsbeta Klein of the International Fertilizer Association and her predecessor, Charlotte Heberbrand, actually going into some of these really, really difficult issues. This fertilizer crunch that we're in at the moment is super serious. And you're right at the middle of it all.
Yes, sir.
Now, nice to see you again, as always. And to greet also Denise. Hello to Denise. And by the way, you're still in Vietnam, and I know that there are quite a lot of issues with accessing nitrogen in Vietnam. Not a problem right now, but could be a bit of a challenge in forthcoming rice harvesting. Hello to Tui Marian. Thank you very much indeed for bringing round some really lovely, gorgeous, tasty food yesterday. That was the most wonderfully kind thing that you did. Hello to Georgina. There's Lara. Excellent, with Tui. We saw Lara briefly yesterday, kept our distance, of course. Hello to Claire. And Claire, I was just explaining to people that I've managed to get the disease, and doing my best to make sure that I don't continue with this rather strange disconnect between what I am thinking and what I'm saying and what I'm doing, which is really odd at the moment.
Even if you are not the only one, I was also for 2 weeks, but you will be all right. It is
okay.
But then
Thanks, Dad. That's reassuring, and others are saying that about 2 weeks, and they're all saying, don't push yourself, don't push yourself. Hello to John. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining. Hello to Polly. Great, you're on. So, Mahika and I are preparing for this today, and we're actually, I've got quite a lot to report on. During the last 2 weeks, we've had World Health Assembly, and been a lot of discussion about not just COVID-19, but also monkeypox and hepatitis in children, Ebola, and a number of other challenges. So we could, I do want to focus a bit on what the World Health Assembly felt like. That was the day I felt very poorly, and I actually left before a meeting that I was supposed to have with Tedros. And so we did that, and yeah, it's really tricky. Here's the challenge: we still have a pandemic. It's very, very active. I mean, for example, just in the last 24 hours, the WHO website reported 633,000 new cases and 1,430 people dying with COVID. And I mean, it's quite interesting. We've still got these very large numbers of people reported that having COVID, even though we know that testing has markedly reduced. If I want to know how much COVID there is in the UK or in Switzerland or in France right now, I can't find out. It's just really, really hard to know what's going on. And as with everybody, you just have to ask around amongst your friends. How many people do they know who are unwell? What's happening in hospitals and so on? But what we are hearing clearly is that if we're in New York City right now, they're dealing with a really quite massive wave, and also numbers are going up in Latin America as well. And if we go further eastwards, let's just temporarily go to what's happening in East Asia, near where Adspikers is. China has got a number of surges going on, and the more contagious BA4 variant of Omicron is most definitely now being reported from within China. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, that's North Korea, has got a nationwide lockdown to try to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on the economy. And they haven't got many tests, but they're reporting very large numbers of people with the disease, something like 80,000 a week. It's super difficult for WHO to get the information. And there's a lot of pressure from government asking people to follow the rules and to minimize spread. And so we're really concerned about that. And indeed, in DPRK, there's a lot of people reporting that they've got headaches, they've got lethargy, tiredness, and they've got skin problems, hives and so on, which are a feature of the current infection. So I just want to keep stressing, hasn't finished, hasn't stopped, still causing trouble, still causing quite a lot of people to die each day, and that we have to maintain that messaging despite the fact that still an awful lot of countries would like to be able to turn their backs on it. Our colleague Maria van Kerkhove warned recently that the virus is continuing to spread at a very intense level around the world. She says the WHO expects to report a decline in the weekly cases, but she says all the time that's because of a decline in the number of tests. And the email that my colleague Mahika sent round showed the latest instance data. And yes, it looks as though the thing is quite nicely tailing off. But we know that because of the kind of reduction in testing, it makes it super hard to assess how intense transmission is. It also is really hard to track the variants. And indeed, the information that we've got about the increase in numbers of cases with variant Omicron BA4 and Omicron BA5 is because there are still a relatively small but excellent group of laboratories that are doing their best to try to track what's going on. In the US, there's a treatment that's become really very popular that is a combination of two antivirals. It runs under the trade name of Paxlovid, and it's reported to actually reduce the duration of suffering. But there have been reports last week that perhaps you shouldn't really prescribe Paxlovid for low-risk patients, because what seems to be happening in some is that after treatment with Paxlovid, their secretion of the virus drops and they become negative quite quickly. But then there's a rebound and they start having a virus in their nasal secretions again. And actually that second rebound may be associated with quite a lot of virus, but without so many symptoms. So it's a rather unfortunate situation that they are contagious without knowing they're contagious. So people are looking quite carefully at Paxlovid. I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. It sounds like a remarkable drug. But what I am saying is that, as with all new things for COVID, one just needs to keep a very close watch. And I will continue saying to everybody, this is a constantly surprising virus and a constantly surprising illness. For those of you who are interested in my own symptoms, just to say I've really not felt so ill for an awful long time. And it's unlike anything I've experienced before. I really dislike the fact that I can be lucid like I am now for 2 hours, and then all of a sudden I am completely exhausted. And I then have to sleep for an hour or two before I can start doing anything again. I really do hope this isn't going to go on too long. My friends all tell me, give in to the tiredness when it comes, don't fight it. Don't push yourself. If you push yourself, it goes on for longer. And in fact, I understand that Twee, who's on here, your husband JB was telling me last night when he brought round the beautiful food, he just said, don't fight it, don't fight it, don't fight it. And John said the same. He's on here as well. And I think that's kind of terribly important advice. Terribly important. Anybody else who's got tips as to how to perhaps reduce the risk of long COVID, very, very glad to hear it. I was having some really awful dreams, and the end of my dreams and then the wake-up period particularly horrible. Not quite sure where the dream ended and life sort of waking began. It seems like almost a lucid dream, because it's almost as though you're inside the dream and taking part in it. Not like any other dreams I've had before. Not like the dreams I get if I'm at high altitude. They're not very nice, those dreams. But these dreams have been really very difficult. All sorts of interconnected emotions, disturbing. And so I've been looking it up, and yes, everything I read says that nightmares are more common, and that there is quite an association between really these very extreme dreams and various forms of mental disturbance and the rest. Also hearing that women seem to get some of these phenomena more than men do. Teenage girls more stressed than boys during their COVID, just trying to pay attention to this. Of course, this kind of illness is not really compatible with going to work. Even if you do want to go to work while you're still infectious, because either you've got to because you need the cash, or because your employer is requiring you to work, it must be super hard to be productive. And I'm not surprised to read that in Australia there's high teacher absenteeism due to persistently high COVID-19 transmission rates. 58,210 active cases recorded in Victoria State on Tuesday, and really disrupting education. And I'm sure that some of this dislocation that we're reading about in the European travel industry may also be to do with absenteeism, though I notice that that's not mentioned too much in the European press. I hear that in Vermont, attendance at universities by students is below 51%, making it difficult for students to actually progress through their education. I ask myself, what on earth is making it necessary for authorities to actually refuse to encourage people to wear masks and physical distance and so on? I mean, this absenteeism and the general dislocation associated with this disease can't be very good for employers. But there's this extraordinary disconnect between this need of societies to try to show that COVID's gone and finished and is away, and at the same time the impact that it's having on people everywhere still. Now, there's other infectious disease outbreaks going on right now. I first was told by the Chief Medical Officer of Scotland about hepatitis happening some weeks ago, and it was one of the first signals that there's a problem. Well, there's 650 cases of acute hepatitis of unknown cause now being reported to the World Health Organization in children from 33 countries all across the world. And that's actually happened between the 5th of April and the end of May. And actually, there's still no understanding of what's causing this hepatitis. It's thought to be that there's been children taken out of circulation, so not exposed to the usual cocktail of adenoviruses and other viruses that they experience when they're young, and so they are particularly susceptible. So it's a sort of an impact of COVID, but associated with lack of exposure. Well, is that true? Don't know. All I can say is that this is not a nice hepatitis. There have been 10 reported deaths, and quite a lot of children have needed to have liver transplants. So this is still something that's being looked at. Some people ask me, is the monkeypox that's being reported around the world, is that linked to COVID-19? I'm not sure that it is, since Britain first reported a confirmed case of monkeypox, someone with this rather unpleasant rash, on May the 7th. There's been 400 suspected and confirmed cases reported to the WHO. It was a really quite serious discussion in the World Health Assembly from 24 countries. And it's actually, these countries are far from where monkeypox is normally endemic, which is in West Africa. So this is a really unusual situation. But there's absolutely no reason, in the view of WHO, for any panic about monkeypox. It spreads through close contact, and it usually does not cause severe disease. My messages haven't really changed. It makes me sound a bit like a broken record. The pandemic is not over. The virus is dangerous. It is continuing to mutate. It is causing widespread absenteeism, disrupting education and essential services, making running health services particularly difficult. I encourage people all the time, please get yourselves up to date with your vaccination, especially if you're in my kind of age range, above 70. You really do want to get your protection as constant as possible. If you're in a place where boosters are available, I think by now you should probably have had your 2 basic immunisations and then probably 2 boosters by now if you can get them. Otherwise, you are running the risk of being in my kind of situation. I was due for my second booster in June, but unfortunately the virus got me first. I'm still really worried about long COVID. The numbers, 2 million people with long COVID in the UK. I mean, that's not good. And we'll hear from Claire, if she stays on, a little bit more about what this actually means for people and for communities. The long-term impact of COVID on your cardiovascular health, long-term impact of COVID on your mental well-being, long-term impact of COVID on your ability to exercise. You know, it's highly desirable to try to avoid it. With some of Claire's colleagues, including cardiologists in the north of England, and together with Dr. David Fedson, who's been on these briefings, we're looking really hard at whether or not treatment with aspirin and statins, also with ARBs as they're called, can actually reduce the risk of the clotting, the microclots that we believe is associated with long COVID. Now, I'm not saying that this is a therapy that people ought to turn to try to reduce the risk of long COVID, but there's a lot of work underway right now to look at people who take statins and aspirin and ARBs to see whether they get a lower incidence of long COVID. And Dr. Fedson and others are involved in prospective trials to see whether this kind of therapy does reduce the incidence of long COVID. That is hugely important, because with this continuing high incidence of COVID, and with governments really unwilling, for all sorts of good reasons, to encourage action that will prevent transmission, anything that we can do that will reduce the risk of long COVID, because it's so debilitating, is absolutely hugely important. And so what do we do when governments really are trying to avoid encouraging people wearing face masks? They want to stop face masks being worn at festivals, at conferences and other do's, because they're trying to get their economies going again. And there's a lot of discouraging of masking and of distancing. And yet at the same time, we've got these continued surges of COVID occurring. We don't know how big they are. What do we do? Well, I was at the World Economic Forum last week, and I was walking along the street in a bit of a rush, and somebody stopped me quite roughly, grabbed hold of me. And before I knew it, there was a microphone under my face and a guy with a camera just to my left. And I was being asked questions about, didn't I feel absolutely disgusted with myself for scaring the world? Didn't I feel disgusted with myself for being responsible for the long lockdown in Melbourne? Didn't I feel that I should have held China to account? Didn't I feel that WHO had made a complete mess of things? It's super difficult when you're actually trying to walk along a street because you're late for a meeting and all this stuff is going on. You don't want to be rude, especially because they're filming and you know it's going to be broadcast. But at the same time, it's also quite difficult to deal with questions like that. I asked the gentleman who he was. He gave his name, and he works for an Australian media company apparently called Rebel News. He wasn't an accredited journalist at the World Economic Forum. And I tried to be polite. I said, look, you know, WHO can't go around and start telling countries off. We're owned by 194 countries. And I also made it clear that we hadn't actually ever said lockdown was the primary means of control. And my usual sort of remarks. I was accused of trying to wriggle out of it. And then eventually it was posted. Some of you may have seen it. And it's interesting that there was another person who was given this kind of ambush tactic at the World Economic Forum called Naz. He's he's a really amazing person, Naz. He's one of these people with enormous social media following, and is really trying to help companies and young people to be active in preparing for the future. And Naz was also stopped by this person from Rebel News. And Naz decided that he was going to do a riposte. Mahika kindly found it for me. And what's important is that he's identified this particular style of journalism as something called guilt activism. Apparently what you do is you make a person who's trying to do their job and trying to do it as best they can to feel guilty. Of course, after this Rebel News posting appeared, my Imperial College email was full of stuff that is blood-curdlingly rude. People saying they want to do things to me, to my family, and all that. And I'm going to be tried in the sequel to the Nuremberg tribunals for the genocide that I've caused and so on. So I thought very hard about this. You know, should we stop? Should I stop doing these briefings because it offends people so much? Should I stop doing social media? I don't really want to. I in reply to some of these people who write this stuff, I say, look, I'm not trying to scaremonger. I'm just trying to say what I see. And I think it is the job of people like me, especially if we're given the wonderful title of being a WHO envoy, that it's our job to try to explain what we see. It's not very nice when that kind of ambush happens, because that kind of fuels the very angry people. And a lot of them, they don't ever sign their emails, and they use something called Proton Mail, which is one of these secret email things. And so you get the vilification, but you can't actually, you don't know who's written it. Anyway, so I do try to reply to them just non-committally. But I thought you might be interested in that, and I mean, I get nothing compared with what my amazing colleague Maria Van Kerkhove, who is just so brilliant, and we were with her at the World Health Assembly, socially distanced, of course, and she was describing just how much stuff she gets. And of course Tedros gets it, and Tony Fauci gets it, and Tony Fauci has to have guards outside his house. So it's kind of weird what's happened and what it's done for public health, really. Now, just to finish, I thought I'd just have a word or two about COVID. Now, you know that I've been given the chance of being part of the global crisis response group set up in the middle of March by the UN Secretary General on the food, energy and finance crisis that actually has been in place really since about August last year, and it's been picking up. And it's been exacerbated by the Ukraine war, but it was going on beforehand. And it's because climate change and COVID and conflicts have all come together and have contributed to rising prices of food, rising prices of energy, rising prices of fertilizer. And actually, you take it all together, it's an overall rising cost of living. And that really hits poor people, whether they are in poor countries, in middle-income countries or rich countries, but poor people are hurting. I mean, in Britain, you know this. In South Africa, you know this. In Kenya, you know this. In Vietnam, you know this. And the UN Secretary General wants to try to do something about it. Our analysis is that COVID's had an awful lot to do with this. COVID devastates lives. How does it do it? Well, it displays inequities and actually reminds us that if you're poor, you have a really, really difficult time of it. It disturbs employment and it disturbs food systems. The result is that there are fractures, particularly in the systems that poor people use to get by. I mean, they're very sophisticated, intricate systems in the informal economies of countries around the world on which poor people depend. Much, much more complicated and intricate than what most of us who are on wages need to do with our nice bank accounts and internet banking and so on. If you are on daily wages, if you are in the informal economy, you depend enormously on long-standing relationships between groups in your community. And COVID's really undermined these. And we hear it all the time, particularly for countries which are dependent on tourism, where there's been a cutback in tourism over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's affected poor people. Or countries where folk used to travel and then send back remittances. A lot of that's got disturbed. And people going as migrant labourers, a lot of that's got disturbed. And so the web of society on which poorer people depend has been damaged, and many of these folk do not have access to the kind of protection, the furloughs and so on, that people on salaries have been able to get. And with COVID being repeated, with long COVID affecting so many people, it doesn't sort of stop suddenly, it's just there all the time. Reinfection, long sickness, not always people getting immunisation, because they're not sort of jumping up and down saying to each other that the government's got their backs. And the Edelman Trust Barometer, which I referred to before, and which was released at the World Economic Forum, shows very clearly that trust in government, trust in authority among the lowest 20% wealth quintile, that is, the lowest wealth quintile in 30 out of 33 major economies, has dropped by an average of 20%. Basically, poor people are just trusting less and less and less. And so this, we believe, is one of the underlying factors behind some of the misery that's associated with this cost of living crisis. Now, one part of it is to do with access to food. So what's the solution? Is it just to try to pump more food into poor countries? Well, we don't think so. We think actually this is what we call an access problem. That poor people can't access particularly the nutrition that they need because it's become 30, 40, 50% more expensive to do so. And so their coping strategies mean going without meals or cutting out nutritious foods. And that means who suffers? The children, the women. And so it's an access problem that's affecting poorer people, particularly women and children, going to impact on nutrition, impact also on people's ability to realise their rights, increasing the likelihood of mistreatment. And our friends in UNICEF, our friends in non-governmental organisations like the Red Cross are saying this is an absolutely massive issue. Cost of living crisis, biting into the lives of poor people, exacerbated by COVID, exacerbated by climate change, particularly bad in East Africa where there's a drought, particularly bad in Pakistan where there's overheating, particularly bad in West Africa where there's conflict. And it'll probably play out quite long because the challenges with accessing fertiliser will affect productivity into next year, including on rice, which is okay at the moment, but where Ad Spikers is, that could become a problem. And then there are countries that are really, really in difficulty. Sri Lanka, which has got a big problem because they defaulted on their debt. And we know that actually India and some other countries are being really amazingly helpful, but it's not easy for the Sri Lankan people. And there's still tough times ahead. It's also difficult in post-conflict countries, Iraq, and in still ongoing conflict countries like Yemen and Syria. It's difficult in Jordan with a lot of refugees, difficult in Egypt, which is highly dependent on imports from the Black Sea region. So in certain countries there's already difficulty, and the people who track food crises and cost of living difficulties are saying that there are areas now which are in a state called IPC5. That's the Integrated Phase Classification number 5, which basically means famine-like conditions. And that is happening, and particularly, I mentioned it before, in Ethiopia and Somalia, in northern Kenya, and so on. Now, if you've got a cost of living crisis like this, and there's an access difficulty, the thing that is essential is social protection. And we discussed last time a bit. During the interval, I've been working really hard as part of this global crisis response group, encouraging targeted social protection for all poor households, urban in particular, women and children in particular, through government, but also through non-governmental organisations, but also for TIP and others, social protection for smallholder farmers in rural areas who are having real difficulty at the moment, and social protection for the small and medium enterprises on which they depend. In South Africa, we heard from the farmer organisations that around 50% of small and medium enterprises have just gone bankrupt in the last 3 months. So this is a really, really, really serious situation. It's not just in the low-income countries. It's also happening in middle-income and high-income countries, Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. And I just want everybody to keep a lookout for it. And if you've got any influence, to just make sure that everyone understands that if poor people say they are just finding it difficult with feeding their families, there may be some truth in that. Don't dismiss it as perhaps inappropriate. There is sometimes a wish for people to accuse poor people perhaps of over-exaggerating. We saw this from one or two parliamentarians in European countries. From our side, we don't think that that is what's the normal situation. We think that actually people are hurting. So thank you, everybody. That was my main remarks. We haven't got a live illustration today. The fact they're not here reminds us how much how brilliant they were. And what I'd like you to do, we've got 32 comments in the chat. Catherine, if you wouldn't mind telling me, who would you like us to call on? If you just give us a little listing. And by the way, here's a little fun fact. Today is the 117th open online briefing in our series. And some of you have been at most of them. And so that's a really, really remarkable thing that we've been doing this together. 117. Thank you, Mahika, for that piece of news. Okay. And by the way, Maria Van Kerkova, who I wrote to invite to join, has just needed an operation. So I'd like, on behalf of all of us, to send her our very, very, very best wishes. She's such an amazing human being. Right, over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, David. Oh, sorry, my video is on and off. Thanks, David. So just to let everybody know, Iman had a number of interesting comments, but she's had to jump to another meeting. So we'll make sure that those are reflected later in part of our updates. But we have some, I don't want to be the spoiler. So Nigel has some news that I think is worth talking about, and Joe is speaking both to Kenya and her experience with COVID. Tip has some comments on your continuing this work, which I think is important, and Adrian, and of course, Claire speaking to long COVID. So I think all of those pieces are super interesting. I hand back to you. It looks like the chat is going. Oh, and Karen, thank you so much. I'll make sure that your question ends up in David's stream. But I think that this conversation is super
Okay.
important. So back to you.
Thank you. So here's the listy. Tell me if I've got it wrong. Claire, then Nigel, then Joe, then Tip. Who else? There was somebody else you mentioned. I didn't write it down. Anyway.
Yeah, nope. I've got it here. It's so Nigel, Tip, Joe, Adrian McCord, and
Adrian.
and Karen Palmer.
And Karen. Okay, beautiful. Let's go. Claire, please. Welcome, Dr. Claire Rayner.
Hi, it's great to see you. First of all, I am really sorry that you've succumbed to COVID. It's just so sad that people are getting it despite all the protections that have happened up till now. Definitely rest. You have to rest. So, really take it as easy as you can for the first few weeks. Things are very worrying. One thing I wanted to say was, obviously, I abhor the sort of tackling of people like you for what is good advice, and it's happening all the time on Twitter. And personally, there are a few of us that are kind of sort of rebutting some of this stuff. We've kind of said the gloves are off now. So I wanted to put in the thought that the risks of people not wearing a mask are now much higher than the risk of some discomfort or loss of image or whatever. So I think that is the situation we're in. It is actually so risky not to do these things that I don't think we should be afraid of keep advising to do that. I think that's one of my main points. The figures for the UK and long COVID are dreadful. They are, as you say, reported as 2 million. Now, most of those people are of working age and form the workforce. And I may not have the figures entirely accurate, but I am working on a position paper at the moment. And I am told that we have a possible workforce of 26 million people in the UK. So if 2 million have got prolonged problems to the extent they haven't been able to work for a year or two, that's 2 out of 26 million, which means 1 in 13 of our possible workers has a really life-altering long-term illness. So it's not, it's a huge proportion of the workforce. The word on the street from various sources is that the reasons for the airlines not being able to run flights is so many people are off sick. And of course, that isn't being mentioned. And the media and nobody wants to mention it because that would mean that they would have to admit we have a problem. But actually, there are just huge, companies and organizations lacking staff. So, yeah, I think those are my main points. I don't know if there's any help, but...
but you are so brilliant. You don't give up. You've managed to, I think, together with a small group of amazing people, since 2020, you put long COVID on the map, and it's real and it's important. And we know from your experience and the experience of Paul Garner, Robin Gorner, who wrote to me the other day, that it is important, and you are stimulating the right kind of research to try to find out how to stop this. So thank you. We're a community. We've managed to hold together through our 100 and I didn't know so many.
I know.
117, whatever. So let's just remember that we need to keep the thing going, gloves off, but at the same time, always polite. That thing
Absolutely.
that I keep reminding myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like, I'm not a giver upper, and obviously nor are you. And there's, I suppose, a life force in me that keeps going for that kind of thing. But I want to say, for the people that are doing it, we do it despite incredible exhaustion, and we wish to give up, but we don't. Yeah. So I think I hope to encourage other people not to give up.
Now, there are some people on with the initials GS and PG. And if either GS or PG would like to speak, I don't want to necessarily go further than that. If you want, yeah, PG, come in.
Is that PG as in Paul Garwood? Is that me? Or
That's you, and GS is next to you on my screen. You could just say hello and say who you are, and people will love you for joining us, both of you.
Thank you, David.
Hi, it's
Good.
Gabriella.
So my
Yeah.
name is Paul Garwood. I work at the World Health Organization in communications, and I've had the great honor of working as closely with David and learning so much from David over these past couple of years. And I thank David for sending me this invitation today to join this call. I wasn't too sure what the call was going to be, but I knew it was going to be informative and enlightening, and was really happy to be here, and again really grateful to be connected to David and this broader community now. So
this lovely man who has managed to, he was right behind all the hand washing stuff at the beginning. He's been great after the ambush that I had, and I was so embarrassed about it. I was so worried I might have let WHO down, and he's been just such a star. So thank you, Paul, always for having our backs and being the guy you are. And actually, it's also beautiful that GS Gabriella Stern is here. Gabby is the head of communications for WHO, and she's always been with us, and the other 5 special envoys, just always there. And every week when we meet with WHO, they're in the background. And yeah, this was a bit of a shock, this interview business, so I just wanted, if they were able to join just briefly, so that I could give a shout out to Gabby and to Paul. It's just so cool. Gabby, thank you for coming.
Thank you for letting us join, and hi everybody. Somebody is saying here, you've never let WHO down. That has never been a worry. I view the ambush, and actually a friend of mine, an old colleague of mine, was also ambushed, Rebecca Blumenstein from the New York Times, who's the most wonderful person. We worked together for decades at the Wall Street Journal. She was ambushed by the same chap. I don't think we should think about this in isolation. And I think somebody in the chat, I was looking, said something, David, what if WHO were to be even more forthright in its messaging, et cetera? I think that what we have is now 2.5 years of bad actors, people with agendas, and not good agendas. They're not out to help people or save people's lives. They're there to further their political careers or otherwise. So this guy is part of that whole thing. And one of the things I'm thinking a lot about and would love everybody's advice is the following, which is our voice, WHO's voice, had to be rather diplomatic and tactful during the worst of it. And the worst of it was 2020, when Donald Trump was basically trying to destroy WHO and really wasn't focusing on the health and well-being of the people of the United States. And but we had to be rather diplomatic during that period, because the hope was that the US wouldn't pull out. And until the very bitter end, we had to work do our best to try to keep the US in, because the US is important and you wanted the US to stay, etc. Now, I'm working with close colleagues like Paul and others, trying to think, we're in a different era. Can our voice be a bit more forthright, a little sassier, a little less diplomatic when we're facing down these real bad actors? I mean, these are not people who want to help people. So it's a bit tricky, because our institutional voice has to stay within some parameters, but it would be great to get your advice on all this. I think we are going to try some things. And on my account, I can be a little more, I can be a little more out there, but our DG's account, our envoys accounts, I'm talking about social media accounts, our corporate account, it's a little difficult. Anyway, thank you for letting me join. And
Thank you for coming. Gabby is amazing. Paul, amazing. Is Paul, just a quickie, Paul got the goalkeeper of Liverpool to be doing an amazing campaign, and a few other people like that. Gabby was behind a really difficult hard talk that we had to deal with when just around the time when Mr. Trump was initially threatening and then actually taking US out of WHO. Whoa, that was tough. Twee, Marion, who's on here, she was part of our side in dealing with that. Twee, it's super good what you were doing. Thank you for all. And I noticed Karen Palmer, I know you have an interest in this stuff. Several of you do. If anybody wants to follow up and perhaps be linked up with Paul and Gabby, just let us know. This is a really good community of people. And sometimes when Scott Knox joins us, we're helped as well. So don't hesitate, please, to come in and let us know. I'd like to go to Karen Palmer says sign up. Karen, do you want to come in quick? Just because I know you're... You have to unmute. Okay, you're muted still. Yeah, you are.
Hi, here I am. Sorry. Geez, you'd think we'd know by now to hit that button. Thank you for all of this and for what you're saying. I did used to work at WHO and global TB control, so this brings me back into that world a little bit, and I'm grateful to you for that. I do think that we need WHO to be brave and bold and to say that this is not over, because local governments in Canada, it's provincial governments who constitutionally have the jurisdiction over healthcare, are at odds with the messaging. And I think we have to give them ammunition to be able to say this is not done. I do think that WHO still has huge credibility in the world. People listen to what the World Health Organization says. And so say that it's not over, and support governments and local people in pushing back against governments that are saying business as usual, we're back to normal. Shift us back to the precautionary principle. Help us shift our governments back to that. That's what I would say.
Thanks a lot, Karen. It's lovely to be with you again. Paul, come in.
It's just to say, it's me being opportunistic here. I mean, we have various issues that we would, as Gabby kind of touched on, we want to see if we can communicate in a bit more of a bolder way on, maybe just like the previous speaker kind of said. But it's maybe, David, I think I would take your offer to see if I can tap back into you and Catherine to see how through this kind of group of, let's call them influencers, because you influence your networks and your communities. If we can share work that we're doing on particular subjects of real importance, and then have you let us know whether you could get behind amplifying or helping shape or whatever, to contribute to our efforts to try and make a difference. It's been hard, as Gabby pointed out, but we're on several issues, I think, ready to really do as much as we can, push the boat out as much as we can. But having advocates and third parties and supporters, right-minded people getting behind these kinds of things would be, I think, a great help. And David, if I could be so opportunistic to join you and join this group, would be great.
Paul, this is a deal. It will be done. Catherine is the public health person. Mahika is our new comms person. But Twee, who you worked with at the beginning, she's here, but she's a bit in disguise under the little thing TM. We're all here for you. We would love to do this with you. Already people are sending messages saying count us in. Bernice has said, yes, I'm ready. Karen said she's ready. Claire's ready. We'll do it. Okay? Let's move on. Nigel Lloyd, please.
Hi. I've just, beg your pardon. I've got COVID, but it's very minor. It's like a cold. And so I'm grateful for that. I got it at the beg your pardon, Validation of Prior Learning Conference in Iceland. This is about informal learning and is as opposed to learning in sitting in rows in front of a screen. And it was a very exciting conference. But what came through was that we need to get better at learning more quickly. And this fits in, I think, with the global crises we're looking at in terms of health and in terms of food and in terms of climate change. We've got to find better ways of learning and changing people's opinions in order to do it much, much more quickly. At the moment, it's taking years before things filter down through the traditional channels of pilots and then gradually scaling it up and scaling it out. We've got to get quicker at it. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The second is that it sounds as if we have a problem with democracy. We need to try to find ways of getting democracy working better. I'm speaking from UK, and democracy is not working well in UK at the moment. United States, it has not been working well recently either. I think there are many countries where democracy is not working as well as it needs to, particularly when we're in a globally challenged, existentially challenged world. So that's all I wanted to say, but thank you for giving me the chance to say it.
Get well soon, Nigel. Very interesting about your conference. Super good to hear what you're talking about. Tip O'Neill, please. Welcome.
David, just two comments. One, you've always been my pivot point as a CEO as we go through this pandemic, and every quarter or so, I always make a point of sitting in on one of your briefings just to understand where we are, and you've given us great guidance, those of us that need to lead businesses. The one thing, the reason I'm back in is that we came out of the pandemic. I thought that, we were with the supply chains were going to become more efficient. But in fact, it's gotten worse. And so in our business in North America and offshore, we see more and more people out, the longshoremen, shortage of gangs, trains, unit trains being set aside, shortage of rail workers. My concern is that this is, as you point out, this is not over. We just don't have the capacity to move food, to move crop nutrition and other things that we need to feed the world right now, and it needs to be addressed. As to the being attacked on the streets of Davos, that's a good place to get attacked. You walk on the street there, and given the crowd that's there, I'm sure that your face wasn't the only one that had a microphone put in front of it.
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, you're right.
One thing, the second point is, while in a place like Davos, there's so much emphasis on financial capital, I wonder at what point in time are we going to have a Davos style meeting on human capital? Because that's the critical point right now, human capital. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tip. Are you in Philadelphia at the moment?
Yes, sir. I just got in from Vienna last night.
Right. Thank you for joining when I know you've just done a transatlantic. Really brilliant to see you again. Tip works in International Raw Materials Limited. It's a company that does fertilizer and other good things. And so he knows about supply chains. I understand you're at full capacity, that every single plant is actually working overtime sort of thing to try to produce as much fertilizer as possible.
That's right. But one of the problems that's happened is, I've been in this business for close to 50 years. And basically fertilizer moved in a free trade environment. But in the last 5 years, government, a number of different levels, number of different ways, has put in trade barriers. Certainly the Trump trade wars has not helped. Then we've got tit for tat dumping duties and whatever, so that the efficient systems we had for moving product around the world has been circumvented, and product has to move longer distances in the different markets just because of trade barriers that have popped up. So, there's lots of reasons for the inefficiencies in the system, and I'd say government trade barriers is something that has to be looked at.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for reminding us that these supply chain problems ain't over. Thank you, Tip, for being with us. Let's go to Joe Nichols in Nairobi.
Thank you, David. I hope you feel better very soon. We're very saddened to learn that you managed to contract COVID after all this time. Both my daughter and I had COVID about 6 weeks ago, and we had really strange symptoms. We were incredibly clumsy, both of us, and kept kind of misjudging the edges of tables and smashing glasses on the floor and walking into door frames. So it was quite a peculiar experience, I think, for both of us. And we were very scared of the possibility of long COVID, but also very aware even now about the fact that vulnerable people are really not respected for trying to take care of their own health. And, you know, I personally still feel self-conscious when I put a mask on or I choose not to shake hands with people. And it's peculiar because, you know, that is, you know, it's my own experience, but I think it also affects a lot of other people. And that's despite the fact the numbers of people with COVID are going up where I live, where I work. Both when you look at the numbers of tests, the percentage of people that are positive, but also anecdotally, it's clear that it's increasing. But I think what it does mean is that the leadership and the signaling when people do choose to wear masks and when leaders do choose to walk into conferences wearing a mask or appearing to social distance and not shake hands is increasingly important. And I would second and third and fourth everything that people have said in the chat about the need for you and other people like you to carry on kind of leading the way in this respect. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And that's really important. To Adrian Pord, please. Adrian. Can you unmute? Okay. I'll come back to you. Thank you. Let's go to John Atkinson, please.
Hi, David. Thanks for inviting me to talk again. So I'm going to pick a thread out of it, which for me is non-linearity. So what we're seeing with COVID now is how it impacts onto so many world systems. We're seeing it obviously in health systems, not just about treating COVID, but the impact it has on all sorts of other conditions that people are facing. We're seeing people turning up, not being tested until later, not getting into surgery till later. And so all the compound effect in health, but we're seeing it in travel, big headlines around certainly Europe, perhaps North America over the last weekend or so, impact of people either being too sick to work or people being laid off during less travel times, and we just can't bring the workforce back in time. We're seeing it in food systems. We're seeing it in governance. The impact of the management of COVID on the British government will carry on for a good few years yet, I think. So in all of that, things like you're doing with the crisis response group, the global crisis response group, need to happen at multiple levels. Think about systems as they work at, they work at all levels. So joining up at the top is one thing, but we need to join up nationally. We need to join up locally. We need to join up in sectors and make sure that we're not just looking after our own bit of it, because we just shunt the problem elsewhere otherwise. So that's why I was interested in Nigel Lloyd's comments about scaling up. You don't scale up by running a pilot and then trying to roll it out somewhere else, because the somewhere else is different and the people are different and it's far too slow. You can't do it quick enough. You need to act like a virus. You need to be infectious in how you get people doing things. And that means valuing people and connecting to people and relating to people in a different way. And that took me to Tip O'Neill and those comments on human capital. And, it really, you've said all the way through, David, people are the solution. It becomes clearer and clearer and clearer just how wise that is. So thank you for asking me to talk.
So that's John. We are so privileged to work with John and his constant capacity to advise us on how systems really work. Just keep connecting, he says, curiously, without fear, because it's all about joining up. Thank you very, very much, John. I'd like to go now to Catherine for any last word, and then to Mihika.
The last word is thank you, everybody. This has been, we thought that it would be a sort of low attendance day because we're looking at a 3-day weekend with a bank holiday. And it is fabulous to see everybody here. This conversation has been super robust. I would like very personally to say thank you to my excellent friends and colleagues, Paul and Gabby, for joining us. What a remarkable thing to have you here. So lovely. Joe, great to see your face. It's been a while. Claire, thanks as always for the long COVID. Lloyd, please feel better. I mean, Nigel, please feel better. Sorry. I am so, I saw your last name there. You know, it's a terrible, my whole family had it in February and it took us weeks and weeks. Please take care of yourself. It really great to see you here. Thank you. And good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. And maybe back over to Mahika now.
Yep. Thanks,
Oh,
Kat.
also,
Yeah.
don't be embarrassed to wear your masks. Be the people who wash your hands.
Our next meeting is in 2 weeks on 17th June. And if anyone has any suggestions as well on a different format, or if you have any topics you want to discuss, do write in as well. And thank you very much for joining. That's all.
So Sarah Phillips said people take WHO more seriously now than 2 years ago. Could you say that, Sarah, super loud as the last remark, please?
Yeah, I've been watching the responses and listening, and over the last year particularly, and just before it, in the med school, it's WHO said this, and that's it. So credibility's there. And then with the clinicians that are in the workforce in the COVID situation, what did WHO say? And it's different than it was before. It's kind of like that's the word to listen to. It's changed.
On behalf of all of us, I want to give an absolutely massive, loving shout out to Gabby Stern and also to Paul Garwood. They've been with us through this. They've never given up. They've been our main focal point and contact point when I've been feeling a little bit lost and unsure. Gabby's been there. She's talked to me often. Running through the street in the rain, she'll still pick up a phone and have a call, brief me. And Paul, always there. He and I have known each other for years. It's really saying thank you. Thank you for joining. You are amazing. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good next 2 weeks.
Thanks, David. You were great.
Thanks. Yeah.
Stay healthy. Stay safe, guys.